Good? I believe so. Yeah, wait. All right, we're good. All right. Contention 1 as the story continues. When I joined the debate, I was told I would become a better speaker. I would use the debate to improve my English skills, to communicate with others, economically engage with them, and Esau all overhead, learning to assimilate society built to protect me. But I graduated Esau and got better at this activity. As a gained success, I engaged better as a compared to win all and beat my opponents. You do not know who the Cougars are. You only know Centennial KK. A team people point to and say, oh, look at those Koreans. Learning how to debate about working hard to win tournaments. And this hard working, cutting cards through sleeping nights and assimilating to a traditional board debate has turned me into a model minority. But now it's my senior year, and I have a resolution that teaches how to engage other people. Looks like my career has come full circle. I started out learning how to engage people, now it's time to give it back. This year, I choose to engage who I am. Through my experiences with a diverse team, their work and exposure to non-traditional arguments, thus contended too as I wrote relational resolution, Korean immigration has kept the secret of Mexican history. Lily Gonzalez tells her story about how they're forced to suffer as Haciendas, as foreigners and foreign countries. As civilians to us out, it's part of medical history, which has become the secret. Hundreds of Korean users are forced to live in Hacienda. They can never imagine suffering related to sacrifice. They will be forced to make Yili Gonzalez grandparents self-defensible, live with those hard labor, their hands bleeding. You talk about grandparents living and suffering in foreign countries. Those who refuse to work or being, what's your last name? They will see you, but there's no such last name, so they all change their name. Now these celebrities today to represent the myth of the Mayan through the ethnic Korean immigrants were recognized as best workers and the hardest, but the most daily to be excluded and treated like brutes through their identity. That's changed. That's why when they left their home, my first Korean country, not just one side of Koreans, not only see the beautiful mountains, rivers, whole country, the first Korean immigrants Latin America were nicknamed Tiny Korean Plantation. A Japanese slave trader disguised came chosen. Today, Koreans to work on sugar cane plantation. They were sold as slaves to captive plantation owners and factories. They lived life wasn't those of roots, but their diligence earned their reputation as the best workers. Someone said they were given the game anyway, and the narration of America is different by Asians. They faced unique form of discrimination. One that excluded and degraded them, but was kept silent through the myth of the Multi-Culturalism. That is changed in 2093. The exclusive legal political plantation. Immigrants became a power, but not justice. In prison were victims. Opponents were cried non-Chinese immigrants. All Chinese immigrants declared themselves in the claims of entry were verified as constitutional nation. The field of powerless poll reflects a combination of discriminatory violence and source of peers right with the degradation and despair. The experiences of early Chinese and Chinese colonies were all Asian immigrants because other Asian would encounter similar violence. The Koreans thought that immigrants were born from worldwide anti-Asian reaction by repeated away. They tried to overcome discrimination and distancing themselves from the Chinese and everything by becoming more westernized. Despite these efforts, like immigrants westernized being out there, they were treated like white Americans, really different strains of the same yellow pale. The 70 federal nationalized 8 permitting only 3 white persons become nationalized. Following the 14th Amendment, Asian became the only groups ineligible citizens. And besides denying Asian rights, classifying aliens into 2 groups, those eligible and those ineligible citizens. Privatization, state discrimination, much classification for states to pass statutes that race neutral phrases, thus leading the community to equal protection. Out of many states to advantage Asian place in secondary schools. Asian Americans deny quintessential rights, such as the right to own property, the right to choose their own profession. Few people know that Asian Americans challenge legality in secondary school. The county Asian Americans have not faced discrimination. Challenge this that Asian Americans are say passing model minority. Asian Americans' contribution to civil rights movement have largely been ignored. Federal national care profound impact on the psyche and the development of the Chinese American community. The hundreds of immigrants were detained abroad. The Asian life facility Italians escaped through detained street animals are combined, forcefully disqualified crime quarter. I'm on the still present stereotype of Asian Americans as aliens. Those who not belong, those presents not desired. We must recognize that early Asian immigrants were brave enough to raise their voices. We can do no less, but the plight continues today. Experiences of child robbery have demonstrated oppression against Asian Americans. The only way to solve this is to let people know that China believes that on the second generation Korean Americans not change lives. I'm just a simple worker, farm worker. I'm just engaging in non-traditional legal scholarship may hurt my job projects. I think about the very important stop me when I'm trying to my valid life is not good enough to let me return. He asked me where my passport was. I met full company force made the American fields. I told my law firm I would not be ordered until I could prove that I belong. I've been an alien. Things have happened since like the time I was refused service after these representation with time I was stopped due to suspension possessed stolen data from forwarding police against one small Asian man. Perhaps they're free. I might know martial arts. They cannot even say one word. Sorry, no matter how hard I struggle, it's not clearly, no matter how hard I try, I cannot be as good as everyone else. I can never be white, but I'm tired of silence, and so I raise my voice. But throughout our society, the presence of minorities is policed by hostility and discrimination. They are locked between inclusion, ostracization, and understating of the nation. I promise to realize that's effort 2007. Minority people struggle with the process of gains happening. For a majority of community characterized by different cultural suffering, source hostility over discrimination, violence, usually problematic or display influence, defines not entering the social content that includes a substantially disparate population, separated from child by race, religion, and language, locked in positions somewhere between inclusion and ostracization, between the dominant and the subordinate. Not to mention that people judge beneath them, seems partly unjust in the nations like the United States, diversity, so it's ideals promising possibly realized freedom well. Now this manifestation of the minority, portraying Asian Americans solely as hardworking others, without the explosion of the fight, make people resent become unsympathetic to Asian Americans. This has 3 implications. 1 is that the impression of Asian Americans Canadians. 2 is that Asian are used just by impression of other minorities. Now 3 is Asian perceived as privileged by other minorities, when in reality that's not true. China 93, there's 3 of discrimination, obscure portrayal of minority. Asian Americans portray harboring talents society, belief in the minority. allows it's just like no unique discriminating face Asian Americans, betrayal, prevention, general problem, northern needs. You will find a Puerto Rican mind, pulling self country, become a mild self-reliant, dismount ideas, become a logic, unquestioned, self-reliant, current social reliant. One can be labeled as a tool of oppression, which one denies the extent of oppression, discrimination against Asian Americans. Two, legitimizing oppression of other racial minorities. This may have dangerous names possible both inside and outside the Asian American community. The mistaken audience unsympathetic to the process of Asian Americans. They keep responding to them. Forever, modern tough other reactor, they're trying to outspoken Asian Americans right. Once do believe that she was offended by his militant tone. Surely, some of these other rights now be just, if not more militant, had they been offended, but Taylor's friends, community, my part, they said they were not offended by anyone black men, Chicago, they were right. They understood the anger faced by blacks in Chicago. They emphasized with the Native Americans, but the Asian Americans, it made me angry because I did not even know that Asian Americans felt oppressed. The myth of the Almighty renders the oppression of Asian Americans invisible. To the outside, to be without social service, thinking Asian Americans to see officials denied funding for social service for a college major excluded Asian Americans students for education opportunity program. Japanese American men earn income compared to those white men, but they only despite quality education. The income disparity from other Asian American groups is more glaring. Asian American have more workers from the house of wages disparity, common family geographical culture. The myth was a dual harm by cutting out Asian minorities and poor whites who are blamed for not being society. African Americans and Latinos and poor whites are told, look at those Asians. And you're making the content. This blame is justified on meritocracy theories, proven by the Asian Americans. We have complicit in the oppression of other racial minorities. This blame creates resentment against Asian Americans among African Americans, Latinos, and poor whites. The white serve as a convenient scapegoat as Korean Americans in Los Angeles discovered their rise. Many Korean Americans now view themselves as human shield, compensating the white majority. The anchor of the white minority, the bottom line myth, and establish a racial hierarchy with denies the oppression of Asian Americans. Thus, Damien and I affirm a process of conscientization to interrogate the history of the United States federal government's economic engagement towards Mexico. Contended 3 said conscientization. We often competitively participate in debate without ever considering the possibility of how debate can change the world. How the critical thinking and the research skills we develop can provide meaning and advanced methodologies to liberate oppressed groups within our social location. Our speech and focus on the epistemological growth occurring from that activity and the development of a critical consciousness. Debate becomes more than just a game, but a process of life leading to conscientization. Also, you mentioned the fact that young Asian Americans from why the main class government look acting bad to find a way to act to speak to real policy. Young people become critically conscious, politically acting. They're acting following, especially no one is giving them political momentum. Activities are right and culture student actions are drowning their apathy. These Asian Americans gone against the grain and become politically involved. They realize the positive conversion where the tendency for needles is carried by a chance for people to believe there is hope for the future. Common has tried to contribute to the development of Asian American critical consciousness. Now, U.S. economic engagement, as well as we choose to discuss the economic engagement policy, the collective principles of the HID. Our critical examination of this year's policy raises questions of consciousness of how we Asians exist and perceive the world. That can create real change. Also, in 2007, the conscientization being able to enable many education recognizing the understanding the impact of social culture and social oppression having lives. The process of conscientization involves a contemplating the world is hidden within us. While we move by in the world, the process of recognition will not give them what's more dynamically in the making. Such recognition start people working in the present, beginning to act in every chance for naming the words and importance towards actively changing it. Now, every round key development of Asian American critical conscience. Also, during 2007, Asian Americans continue to develop Asian American critical conscience, commit one social change, spirit learning, acting, violent personal acting, or reflection, help move to things toward Asian American critical conscience. Now, our performance is critical. Debate has elements that contribute to conscientization that must be endorsed for effective change. Also, during 2007, critical elements come to true conscientization, importance of taking information to school to calming themselves, lives and shaped by the physical force, important bonus, education, key social more made a difference. School has not taught about their racial or the Asian American experience, inspired the experience of other Asian Americans who struggle to overcome the conditions. Women Asian Americans from people when they transfer understanding into action, research, extend knowledge, and learn from effort to maintain. Finally, conscientization occurs when discrete elements work in combination. It's not a purely intellectual experience, absent social elements. Instead, multifaceted, interrelated experience reinforce each other. For activists seeking to raise the critical consciousness of Asian Americans, possess something content to louder cognitive foundation necessary for people to see themselves in relation to the world. There is a value and need to offer a range of experiences across our community, bringing forth variety and construction, often pick academic and programs against student-like heritage. Conscientization derives when people are exposed and combine the lessons learned from a variety of sources.
Why should it be better for good?
Because the judge should advocate that the process of conscientization is good.
Why?
Because the process of conscientization is a methodology to liberate press groups.
Okay, so is that the only form to free oppressed groups?
No, we're saying that's our form that we say is a good form.
Yeah, your evidence, your Asajima evidence says that the way that they realized to free themselves from the oppression was to realize that the world is in the making and to use that education that they have gotten to free themselves.
Yes.
What type of education does the plan do, like, I guess, expose
conscientization is a form of education. It's a process of learning
I
about the world.
agree with you. Okay, I'm agreeing with that point of your argument. Your 1AC is about the fact that Asians are oppressed, and then the plan is to interrogate the history of the United States federal government's economic engagement.
There's no
towards
such
Mexico.
thing as a plan within our 1AC. Our 1AC has an advocacy for how we interrogate the United States federal economic engagement.
Towards
I think what you're
Mexico.
trying to get to is what's like the impact of our 1AC, which we argue is
No,
a breakdown.
I guess I'm questioning as to like why the interrogation of the economic engagement toward Mexico liberates Asian groups.
That's how we do it. That's one way to do it. We say that Asian Americans were also enslaved. Within Mexico,
Yeah,
tens of
so that
population.
story about them being enslaved, the evidence.
That is a metaphor
Yeah,
for the
hold on.
myth of the model minority, which we say has broader.
I have another
implications.
question. So the story is about Koreans who fled because there was going to be a civil war, so they went and picked cactus in Mexico, which they were paid. That is what your evidence says.
No, that's not what it says anyway. A Japanese slave
Okay,
trader.
that's
came to
besides the
Chosun
point.
and
You see,
Korean
the
workers
point
during
of the
occupation.
story of the 1AC is to relate ourselves to the myth of the model minority, how Asians are used as human shields for the oppression of other groups, constitute a continual psychological
And if
violence
you look
of
to
Asian
the
Americans.
narrative
Okay,
at the top
so
of the
Asian
1AC,
Americans are oppressed because they are seen as model minorities. How does interrogation of the United States?
that's what our performance
resolve
does. That's what our performance does. We perform in breaking down of the myth of the model minority within the debate space.
Okay, why is this
Previously-
debate intrinsically key?
Why isn't it key? It's debate. We're arguing.
That-
Also, wait, you also could see at the beginning of the cross-section that you will agree that it's a constant clarification of who we are in the world. If it's a constant clarification, that means this debate is critical to our epistemic growth.
No, that's not the way you explained it. Okay,
That's exactly what our evidence says.
yeah, no. So also the Osajima argument, I guess I'm wondering if like that can be an independent reason to like vote affirmative. Like even if we win that the plan is a bad idea in the abstract, can you still win? Or your advocacy.
If you win that conscientization is bad, you win.
Okay, so the only part of the plan is just to theorize
What's the plan?
the advocacy statement, the conscientization argument.
We would say the role of the ballot is for the judge to pick whichever performance and methodology best liberates oppressed groups. Our methodology is conscientization, and the way we perform that is break down the myth of the model minority.
Okay.
Two off, and then the second contention. Can you switch with me though, because this one's like bugged.
It works. All right, we're good.
Our interpretation is the debate is game, and the affirmative must stimulate an increasement in economic engagement towards Cuba, Mexico, or Venezuela, and resolve before Congress, reflects the legislative format of the school officer, and for the country to firm position afterward, resolve the council petition of the mayor, and debate is game, which means fairness comes first. The resolution to start with the debate is the process of the ballot determines the winner and the loser. Lana and Rose and I give a theory of approach and false three-step process. First, to find a game which captures choices available to players. Second, a solution concept which embodies assumption about behavior, any described to the players in the model. Third, one can generate prediction about what types of behavior or are not supportable by equilibrium specified game. The key question of what is the game theoretic analysis is called policy section related to information game theory is the best way to understand the debate. Kelly and 3-0 some games competitive one player games, others is interested in 2 players always opposing competitive 1 player must win, and the expected of the game theory is particularly well suited analysis. 0 some games not each every day left bound and ARP impact is very to explode the topic include every single movement or objective remotely related to economic engagement, countless numbers of individuals, all with the unique claim to make consultation impossible. Turns all the key in education claims because we can't actually discuss the movement, and they also eliminate negative grounds. It's impossible to debate that our methodology is bad in the abstract. They get to choose the grounds of engagement are more specific controversial topic resolution shows because they are de facto good or bad. The world has no such debate in the state's point. In the game is critical research dialogue, hang on, in debate games are based on pre-designed scenarios to interact and communicate with the domain specific game space. All forms of communication, culture, subject, use of centripetal and centrifugal force. Centripetal force is disrupted by impose one to the centrifugal force involves a range of dialogical debate games, bodies, centrifugal and centripetal forces. Centripetal elements are determined by rules of the game, open-ended, go from centrifugal elements and create virtually endless possibilities for research game facilitation requires balance between early rules and 2 broadly possibilities and interpretation of the game. Centrifugal orientation into individuality manifests itself as dynamic between monological and dialogical discourse. With the monological side, Socrates dialogues, the teacher never learns discourse becomes monologized when someone who knows injects someone who is ignorant when their lies are referred by authority. Dialogic, normative, and ideal against monologue is the most important. Should be dialogue is the end of itself and process of dialogue outweighs the outcome to debate more sin. And for dialogic becomes world's beliefs, the schools of different process would be central. We will not only learn to learn best in a dialogue, becoming the world ends to be developed, ever learning cells. The most important thing is the value process itself, getting inside perspective of the group's learning. That's a perpetual process we use to learn and value and result by striving having. We must keep the conversation going. And next off is the critique their methodologies and misguided reliance on culture as a politically subversive tool outside the system plays into fetishization of diversity within corporate university or acts becomes another tool of recruitment jumper in one declining nation, saying the absence of the state transnational corporation actions from the information from amongst the production from nations into worker production for the global economy of region rather unusual historical moment when big business joint forces with the university to defend the urban action and interest of developing and diverse and well-trained workforce and multiculturalism has become diversity management for newly compliant university population. Diversity is a customer service to problematic multiculturalism, the hybrid coexistence of diverse cultural life worlds, which poses itself today as the norm appearance of its opposite of the massive presence capitalism as a universal world system. And you should evaluate the resistant claims with a high degree of skepticism, asserting that you exist outside the system and your critique makes their advocacy blind with the force that dictates its use jumper. And when it's something that faces corporate shift to simply retreat into classroom scholarly journey, where does it need for the management design exercise its influence cultural critics, choosing the incentive to posit its culture as a sign of freedom or one management design, signing as a corporate influence, suggesting that critics speaks from a moral position outside market forces. Your question being bad is only independent subject to match serious criticism, nothing inherent in legitimate culture guarantees its resistance status. We are at a moment in history when we don't need more literary criticism claiming resistance to subjects, but rather more work that engages explicitly with institutional policy and other material issues. Latino criticism has to often ignore culture's material individuation in roots of distribution and circulation as well as very mundane place where the routines of everyday life is very inability to comment social conditions because it exists on the same planet as the corporate university does not enable culture study, trying to position culture outside the corporation and focusing our efforts on the material conditions that alter our culture's critical, subverting power structure jumper. And one study culture may not focus on culture at all, but rather than may analyze the species which culture is produced from circulating consumer analysis without deal exclusively with text, but also can examine conditions of production, distribution, and reception to these routes. We begin to answer questions of access to literacy and how that shapes access to consumption. We intersect on public sites and practice rather than just commenting on them, looking ourselves within the academic process. This approach simultaneously breaks down disciplinary structure that maintain the corporate university and acknowledge the outdoor power in these practices of diversity. There are no spaces of radical political practice. All spaces within the university are defined by global economic imperative, but that does not translate to all spaces equally in the service corporation case. People may join the movement. Consumer culture proves they just do it to be different. Heath and Potter and for creating the chiefs and mass society suggests people are members of the third. They are manipulated to be served the system. People should be desperate because they are not victims of conformity as the critique of mass society became widespread. This is what people try to do in the society that provides individualism. Being a rebel becomes the new aspiration in the 60s, hippie in the 80s, a goth. It was demonstrating what rejected mainstream society. It was also affirmation of superiority, and that creates a brace to bomb. Camp culture is a status symbol that causes more radicalism. The effort to remain exclusive, defeating the some Heath and Potter for not having to be a rebel. Everyone joins in. The camp culture becomes a culture. As time passes, those who no expensive symbol becomes common. Mystics and rows of distinction. Counterculture must be constantly reinvent itself. This is why rebels adapt. In this way, counterculture has become major for driving competitive consumption. The rebels become images, countercultural consumption, and we must eliminate ourselves between the distance between ideology and ourselves. Over-identification renders invisible the obscene, dominant nature of ideology that previously remained. Actually, skip that part. The history of Korean immigrants has not been kept a secret, commemorated by Koreans and Mexicans. Even Lily de Benelas, who was in their narrative, is plea to how the status quo operates a villa in 7 of their authors. Some came to Mexico looking for new opportunities, others were fleeing the Japanese-Russian invasion. They continue to honor their heritage by preserving traditional Korean dignitaries, attend to honor the village statue, honor the Koreans and the community of Mexican and Korean Americans, honors their past with traditional Korean dishes. Lily de Benelas, I'm very proud to have been born in Mexico, very proud to be Korean. The South Korean government has helped people exhume the statue in the hospital in America to honor the Koreans who arrived in Mexico 101 years ago. And the 1AC impacts are inevitable. Deploying recognition as a distributive good draws attention away from the root causes of subordination and recreates the hierarchies of the status quo all over. And one nation recognition that helps us overcome domination. Even though oppressed people are making demands to back to hierarchy, domination, oppression creates a need for demand of recognition, internalization of stereotypes and inferiority and superiority. The oppressed with the sense that they're lacking something that only super dominators have any real recognition with difference, or others becomes possible because recognition requires the assimilation of difference into something familiar, and their refusal to advocate USFG action hijacked their ability to discuss the politics of the CA. We think that's a voting issue in this instance because of the issue that is at the top of the block, temporary window of bipartisanship means CIR will pass on top of General Obama focuses keep Fox News in 2027. Obama sitting side time coming to your hand agenda is a push an immigration mayor as started offering he'll put more weight behind the issue bills passed by Congress. Bipartisan support constitutes a step away from the green light. Understanding its function of the government is critical to reshape the partisanship surrounding the way that the public sphere understands the immigration policy. You understand in 2K, deliberation requires openness and cooperative exercise. Partnership requires closure and involves a factional exercise of rhetorical manipulation, delivery, democracy, force, and inverse proportion to partisanship. The best way to limit the unavoidable influence of partisanship is to confine partisanship when moving to later stages in making policy formation, especially when viewing constant democratic politics. It's deliberation and partisanship does seem irreconcilable. First, deliberation involves making terms of partisanship involves coercion and is most discursive from rhetorical manipulation. Second, deliberation requires balanceship or judging between a plurality of views. Partisanship presupposes that one view has been judged as superior. Deliberation requires only opposing viewpoint. Partisanship requires an opponent, and immigration reform triggers a radical right white supremacist backlash that ends in a racial civil war. Samakaki in 9 the white supremacists for in the radical right, bringing revolutionary code words for racial civil war to create the white Christian democracy rights as we are a liberal structure here. All lead to the conclusion that CIR could be the last straw for white supremacist movement. They did not have to move into on birthright citizenship. It's time to take this seriously, the agenda of their actions, and the rhetoric about a revolution slash shame and a racial civil war. And even if they win, a risk of collective action, individual self-interest means no one acts, or they act in self-interest, reproducing mainstream structures. Ethan Potter for portion in society is always sign of domination. Everyone is better off when governed by the rules. When left to do what they please, the people will generate the oaths. They do so when their ownership is real. It was assumed everyone could be organized and form a complete open system, multi-conflict people that creating rules arrangements are reproducing feature of mainstream society that they have been created in order to divide and absence rules. No one has an incentive to interest effort and test. Everyone would like to see a particular outcome, but no one has incentive to do what is necessary. In such a situation, prisoner's dilemma and institutional rules prove its reverse. Casual Ethan Potter in rules that social interaction, elimination, collective action problems will let government taking has the same structure. So also where you're not supposed to lie, not supposed to urinate in public, not supposed to litter in press, not supposed to play loud music at night, and so on and so forth. All represent instances which everyone benefits from traits of rules imposed far from repressing our fundamental society that accurately fails to create change. Ethan Potter in 4 decades countercultural rebellion have failed to change anything because the theory of society is also what is prosaic. There's no single system that integrates it. The culture cannot be jammed because there's no such thing as the system. There is social institutions which distribute the benefits and burdens. Market burdens.
Okay, what is the role of the ballot?
David?
For the criticism or
For the entire Wednesday performance?
well, we would say that there's two. The role of the ballot.
That sounds problematic. So what are these two roles of the ballot then?
Yeah, the first is framework that you have to defend economic engagement towards Mexico, Cuba, or Venezuela.
So the ballot determines whether or not we defend economic engagement. Tell me why that's valuable.
We think that debate is a game in order to get things like that the benefits of game theory that we described in the
What is a game?
1 and C. A game is you have winners and losers and they all play by rules.
Who makes these rules?
Debate itself.
Okay.
Also, the term invitation says that that the students would participate in discussions over, and then it says in quotation marks the resolution. It's in the invitation.
Okay.
You
Your only
abide by that
definition.
by joining and paying these.
If you want to take it there, the only definition you read is from resolve. This card says a second independent clause explains the first. Could you tell me how resolve is an independent clause?
I'm not like that good at grammar. I got like a 650 on my SAT. But the result, well, from my understanding of what the card says, it talks about how when we use the word resolve, it has to be talking about something we're pushing. Like the example they use, resolve.
Okay, that's
Constitution of the mayor.
that's if the context of where resolve uses the independent clause. How is one word an independent clause?
So just like SAT class, pretty sure independent clause is a clause that could stand by itself which is different than a dependent clause. Resolve the council petition the mayor, I'm pretty sure that's a independent clause.
Okay, never mind.
The colon.
You read this piece of evidence, first the politics turn. This is our saying that CIR will pass now and passing is bad.
No, it's talking about we should discuss whether
Is CIR good or bad?
the card. We would say that it's good because it's key to talk about things like the race wars, which is
So CIR is good?
Our argument is that we should have discussions about these political ramifications of increasing economic engagement and how that affects the things on the agenda. The thing on the agenda now is immigration reform. We say that discussion of immigration is the discussion of immigration.
Multiculturalism, good or bad?
multiculturalism.
Yes.
The argument is not whether multiculturalism is good or bad, it's just that you feed into the system of multiculturalism.
How?
In that, like, things like, I only go to Urban Outfitters because I want to be a hipster. The only reason you read things that are different is because you want to fit into the system of how teams are doing things that are different.
How do we want to fit into this system of doing different?
Yeah.
No, I'll ignore that question, I have a better one. Your last term says that institutional rules cause this Heath and Potter turn to happen. Are institutional rules good or bad?
We would say that rules are good.
Okay, if institutional rules cause collective action to happen, why is that double term?
The framework argument also says rules are good because it's key to get the cosmic skills of the.
I'll start.
This entire sucks, dude.
You have another one?
Yeah. It's 10, right?
Status of the second law.
What?
Status of the second law.
Status quo should always be a logical option.
Alright.
So immigration is good.
He said discussing immigration is good. But he's like, immigration will pass, now when passing and cause a white supremacist radical right.
Stop correct. I have 9:18 left. Is that right?
Yeah, I started a bit late, so I have 9:28, but you're probably right. We'll just go with 9:18.
Okay. Actually, you can get it then. I'll say that it's on the Dropbox, so you can get it quickly.
Is it the only speech on here?
Yeah. Ooh. What's the letter after J? K?
Yeah.
Just save it in there. Okay. Alright, cool.
You're connected to the internet, right?
Yeah. I should. So order is going to be case, the critique, the framework.
I don't think they think fast enough to that flusher.
Oh,
sorry.
That's some heat. Should have done baseball instead of freaking review.
Right.
I'm good.
Okay. Anyone not ready?
Coming out the one MC, they do not have a just to cover process of conscientization. Yes, they have a review the process of Mexico and talk about the United States federal government economic engagement in Mexico. However, they do not say that a constant clarification of who we are, naming our world, and taking a step to actively change our world. An internal process is a bad one. They've read all these terms that do not apply to the process of conscientization. First is there a heather and positive cards. They say that the only reason we do changes to look cool do. This is an internal process. Raising our critical conscience is not to be different. However, even if it's that's different, that's good because the status quo is already a bad one. The myth of the minority is perpetuated, which causes a psychological violence. The oppression of Asian Americans are kept invisible and swept under the rug. So if that's the status quo, then yes, we should go through a process of conscientization to be able to say that this is in the context of the 60s movement. It's trying to look like a hippie. However, a process of conscientization is more sophisticated than a hippie. That's pretty insensitive. Now, they say it calls it counterculture. No, dude, if the culture right now is a bad one, then changing it to a counterculture is probably not better. Also, a process of conscientization does not create a collective resistance. However, it's our individual process of naming who we are. Our process of conscientization is different for everyone, so there is no link to this argument. Return the impact. They say that the slaves in Mexico were happy, dude. Just because they practiced their culture in Mexico does not mean that they were still not slaves. Slaves from Mexico still tried to preserve some part. Slaves from Africa tried to preserve some parts of their culture from Africa. Does not mean that they're not ontologically and socially dead. Being a slave in itself is a bad thing, and this is irrelevant to the fact that the myth of the minority is still prevalent in the United States federal government society. That we should bring it down through a process of conscientization. This does not rebuke the process of conscientization. They say the one AAC impacts are inevitable. Conscientization is able to solve for it because it's an internal process. Just because we talk about the myth of the minority doesn't say we escape goes to other issues. Because the process of conscientization is different for every issue. Now the politics through this may no they think politics will pass right now. And passing a immigration reform will call it a race war. Then why should we pass about politics? We should talk about policy if it's going to cause a race war in the United States because that's even then. Also, this doesn't matter. The link will be answered in the framework because we do not need to talk about politics just to be able to make changes in the political system. The Osajima card terms the reason the Asians are politically apathetic right now is because they have not go through a process of conscientization, not this collective action turn at the end. Not to make sense because this is an individual action and individual process of conscientization. If institutional rules are a bad thing, it causes collective action, then this is a double turn with framework because we should not concede to the institutional rules. It also means that we do not link to this argument. Philosophical criticism was in an opaque mentality that ignores racism roll off. In 2006, racism applies to philosophical aesthetic and bypass such a table insulated premises and quantity of relation to racial formation. This display something approaching the structural working of racial different color blindness fails to racial domination by the system maintain race neutral methodology and detection of race shorts up the pillars when support aesthetics. Now you can go on to the critique. Versus the permutation of different strategies for different people. Now, we talk about ourselves not from the system. We do not see ourselves outside the system, but we see ourselves oppressed by the system right now, that we have to go through a process of constant clarification to know how we alter in that system. Now, this is talking about the Latin American versus not the Asian American list. Your author speaks from a view from nowhere. Yachi to the five in philosophy, embodying self-practical, achievement of relevance, theory, superfluous, conference, also for truth, detail, one tools for reason, for nowhere, white philosophy, speak for all of us without the fluid slave, next up, his or race identity, whiteness, also shit, informal authority to speak from nowhere.
equality, empowering this one wheels to power lost to because we're not a defense of multiculturalism. We're a defense saying that we bring down the binaries are in the status quo because the Asian American oppression is left invincible in the status quo. Also, here's a line from their code. We are a moment in history where we do not need literacy criticism, claiming resistance through text. If text is bad, then why should we be defending a plan text on a framework? This is also another double turn on the framework flow, and now, conditional ethics are a bad thing. Argument of liability. Neg needs to be liable for the representation because contradictions sustain white supremacy. Not for intrinsic 95. Whether one discursive position will something a white contradiction or a important element of construction, whiteness to contradiction, whiteness is able to maneuver through around college, the college's power to ability to make anything of what you will be socially identical, different contradictions, central dynamic. How that sort of space of white that go into the framework for conscientization is the best. I'm gonna finish the black-white binary argument. This is a card. Said for the executive deployment of binary black-white paradigm of racial discourses in order to construct an animated anti-election theory. Forming theory must be scattered multi-dimensional hordes of racial and justice content, including content and thereby lies the most likely supported comfort of the people of color. The deep division of result by binary racial problems inhibits the formation of anti-racial alliance. You can mark the card to go into frame. Conscientization is the best denominator thing from the F. Crucial debate and debate meaningful for Asians. The myth that render Asian out of the halls of power. Now, we are a prerequisite that politics have proceeded to the right leaving Asian and a CIR advocacy. Political activism is only triggered by the affirmative. That's the OCG. Now, F is not a death of resolution debate. The resolution will continue to survive by our consciousness. Will now debate is ESL. I'm losing my identity. Some resolutions it tells me to forget who I am. Why I just always tell me that I have to simply tell girls to get eye surgery. Now, notice that we don't need welfare education. This perpetuates the psychological violence. Against Asian and means there's no topical version of the framework. Now, framework promotes disengagement. That's specifying engagement topic leads to Asians out in the cold where there are tools. The white supremacist. Now, framework is the myth of the model minority Asian are told to diverge from no will hurt our ability to get jobs in the future by accepted by white. That's Chang evidence. Now, performance to be translated into political action. It's pulsing in 12. The performance in particular to antibody potential political act that open critiques of white supremacy to call for a chain of willing debate around my participate or involvement of voluntary group called leaders on a beautiful struggle. We are saying we want to change that through government policy action. LBS develop platform regarding jobs, education, incarceration, many other issues. They're training by person to discover is not in the after, it's training for the real world. Now, platforms that promote schizocentrics of textualism, which have been critiqued by their own case turns and their own critique above. Now, framework is controlled by white supremacists, rejected Shaw in 2004. The framework that dominated policy announced and implemented by those in power over white male, which must make sure research can be characterized by something biology to be achievable that all subjects share the same relationship with the social environment, positive character. So widely accept that it allows policy now still to dictate the state social policy willfully ignores the political nature of all recent policy analysis grounded in a narrow, really instrumental views and rationality, match their bias and allow policy leaders to represent an announced plan as neutral when they are actually tied to a prevailing relations of power. Now, you should know that discussion immigration is economic gain, killing her, no date. We highlight why the legislation called immigration policy varies and it does put out the risk of discriminating for the difference in policy. Now, since it's not the legislation, the paper contributes to large research to explain that economic gain, such immigration now result includes debaters as to agents, OED, in person to prove that student needs criticism. This is Oxford in 2005. Used to indicate obligation with precise action. He should be very careful. Now, debate is not policy makers. You must challenge whiteness. Dr. Crystal 97. Construction whiteness are unable to academic public discovery. Construction must do critical eyes laws of war to necessarily make whiteness visible. Overturn the side. Must locate interaction where the power of whiteness invoke by the explicit terminology. Now, debate is uniquely interesting virtual artifact because it really direct public class about race and political discourse too. There's a discovery about race and how division of race generated class entered the public art. Now, our mutation goes through a process of conscientization to engage in a plant-based debate. Now, parent interpretation, we should have a discussion of topic what that allows the examination. The history of nations are made and unmade. Now, reasonability is able to solve overall the competing interpretation rigs debate in favor of the white supremacists who can just provide interpretation that is slightly better. It's a moral hazard, which is a reason our individual performance should be performed. Now, their limits are argument. Game theory makes no sense in the concept of a fluid debate. Debate is always changing, and debate is changing right now. To allow game theory to continue, we have to allow the game to evolve or it will collapse. We are a bridge that bends debate. Now, space and point shifts are from around 20. If I read a plan that can read a counter plan that shifts the debate away. Now, we will concede the dialogue impact. That means win or lose, fair game or unfair game. The educational benefit we gain from our knowledge projection outweighs fairness. We will win that the plan limit debate is not the best form of dialogue. Now, decision making makes no sense because I do not need to buy a house to understand how finances work. Therefore, a decision making will result in oppression. Now, rhetorical imperialism limits justify certain number of knowledge to exist or not exist. Solomon and Breakboy 12. These six were rooted in knowledge and language of legal instrument. Empire language already conservative empire should remain restricted. Artificial language culture should be imposed on the political induced by controlling educational and indigenous people with culture would foster a sense of independence by freely union for culture. What?
Actually, never mind.
Mark the card there. Now, turn multi-culturalism to basically recognize the plurality nature of the community or it becomes extinct itself. Value because started in 98, the globalization make a cultural call for the more that first will compensate by reviewing different multicultural communicate styles. Mark the card there.
Okay, so in the beginning of the 1AC, Michael talks about how he's had success cutting cards all night. Then why now do you decide to conscientize the Asian body?
better now than ever. We say that we've been used as the myth of the model minorities in debate. We say our process.
So why didn't you have a starting point there from the beginning of the debate, but just choose it now?
I'm confused. That was our starting point. We say
Or not the starting point of the debate itself, but why is it that you chose just now to?
What do you mean just chose
Just now,
You have to
to
realize
choose
we were going through a process of conscientization that maybe the way we debate, maybe the way we are used, causes suppression of other minorities and psychological violence against us.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
It's probably a bad idea.
I guess that makes sense.
Conscientization is
Jake,
good.
question. So what is the purpose of this debate in context between me and David?
It's our epistemological growth as debaters going through a process of conscientization. This debate is key as a constant clarification of who we are in relation to this world of debate and in relation to the world of
So how do you get a spillover into those who aren't involved in the activity?
You say spillover, we don't claim a spillover. Conscientization is an internal process. It's your constant clarification. You have to prove why me and Michael going through a process of conscientization is a bad thing. We say that we raise the critical consciousness of other people by reading this affirmative. However, that is irrelevant to the fact that we go through a process
So
of
the reason
conscientization.
to vote app is because you raised the critical consciousness.
You have to prove why a process of conscientization is bad, not just because it won't spill over, but why it like.
Okay, you also say like,
What a better method to look at.
you also say different times in the 2EC that it's differently internally for each person that
Yes.
hears your advocacy.
Not who hears our advocacy, for people who go through a process of conscientization.
Why does that mean that the app necessarily solves things like conscientization if it's different for each person?
You're like looking at this as like we solve for all oppression.
No.
That's
I'm
not
just
how-
talking
you
about
say our process of conscientization is a good one. You too can go through a process of conscientization too. Your process of conscientization will be different because you have different experiences in this world of debate, in your own world, in your own personal worlds.
It
That's what
shares
we're
like
saying.
just because it sounds like just because you share a story and others have to listen to it, that means you vote app. That's what it sounded like.
That's not what it sounds like. We're going through a process of conscientization, and we say that breaks down the myth of the model minority. The model minority. The model minority is probably a bad thing.
Okay, my next question is a framework question. The Milner and Tingley evidence that you read has no, denoted evidence. It talks
Yeah.
about how immigration is economic engagement.
Yeah.
Even if that is true, how is it bringing things into consciousness that were from the past? How are we supposed to be able to be prepared for
I don't
those
think
kinds of
that's
things?
what the affirmative is doing. The economic engagement says that recent legislation on immigration policy and economic engagement fails is because we don't have a discussion of what immigration is. Our process of conscientization is a constant clarification of how the United States federal government has been acting in the immigration policy, and it's the only way
Okay,
economic engagement.
last question. The name of the lady, I don't remember what it's like, but the evidence also talks about how institutions are already made in Mexico to commemorate all of the Koreans that fled persecution. Why isn't this
Flood
sufficient?
persecution, there were
Flood
slaves
persecution.
that came to Mexico. and
Because they
that's
were seeking
irrelevant to
economic
the process of
opportunities.
conscientization.
Okay, that-
That doesn't refute that the model minority exists.
Right.
I didn't get to that part. I saved it.
Reasons to reject the team.
Conditional ethics.
Yeah, I get it. I didn't get it.
They got the flash drive. That's better. Yeah, the cabinets. Oh, God.
Like that. Here.
I'm gonna give it a little Randy Jefferson over there. It'll be the critique, then the grammar argument. All right, is anyone not ready? Not going for a permutation, just sense of competition, not inadequacy. Now the double turn argument is not a double turn. This is about why we should not just read literacy criticism, not why text is bad. We know the problem, but we should do something to change it, not just internally, but provide political action, which is exactly what their Okajima evidence, or I forget the author, is talking about, how the Asians use the education and use it within the political sphere to be able to free themselves from being oppressed. Framework. Debate is a game of the affirmative must stimulate an increase in economic engagement towards Cuba, Mexico, or Venezuela. The act can provide any reason for what they do, why they should happen, including race, structural violence, capitalism, social location, but critiques of the resolution itself are negative to God, not affirmative to God. They have to win. That they solve the case to access any of their impacts or role of violence. Examining the U.S. history of economic engagement does not liberate the oppressed Asians. They have to explain how that type of engagement or engagement within the internal is predictable enough. Also, topical version of the gap is to have the government make available visas and the proof of citizenship easier at the border. This is their Robert's evidence to the one to see. I think about the American border who lives somebody and at turn of the United States. He told me that the driver's license, that proof of citizenship, I got my naturalization papers, which were with my parents in Ohio. The ballot is key to change. They have to lose to realize working within the system, especially in hard level. The games are help players persist through negative experience. Most dramatic examples is failure games. They involve repeated failure. The only way to learn how to play a game is to fail at it repeatedly. Players can keep trying until they succeed. Students see failure as an opportunity. Now the politics is only seated if you allow it to be there. Osajima evidence proves that if you work within the political, it can actually help you from being oppressed. And also the resolution provides a stasis point for competition that drives a research or external research impact. Is how we solve their arguments, but education is a secondary component of the debate, not a primary driver of the decision-making skills that we inculcate. We move away from the point of deliberation. We limit the educational potential because the fairness is impossible. The resolution exists to create equal ground, letting them pick the topic, let them make the best topics like racism bad, and that makes debate impossible because teams just pick a moral high ground. Now fairness comes first because debate is a competitive game. There are winners and losers, and the educational benefits are a side effect of the fundamental game structure. All of the arguments are reasons why we should discuss their project outside of the debate, but not a reason why we should about how we should play the game. Second is fairness is key to predictable ground, which is a prerequisite to dialogue that solves all their impacts. Now the debate is ESOL arguments and what I am arguments. This is not subject to inquiry. I cannot tell you how your experience within the ESOL or what the psychological violence that you experience is, which means that there's no way to have productive debates about this. It is a rule at the tournament invitation that you must debate and resolve. The United States federal government should substantially increase its economic engagement towards Mexico, Cuba, or Venezuela, which proves that this is not predictable about the ESOL or the consciousness arguments about how to consciously interrogate the history of that engagement. Also, you should be highly skeptical about how that conscientization of the history of the United States engagement with Mexico is able to solve for Asian oppression. Ask yourself that before you evaluate any of the solvency of the case. Now, the framework arguments do not lead to engagement. The lead evidence in the overview about why they have to lose proves that they have to lose to realize how to win within the system, which is a reason why rules are good. Is an impactor to their frame. Now. Oh yeah, they say that their performance is a political action. This is not true. The case debate was all about how the affirmative is an internal value, and all about how it is internal and it changes within each individual, and it changes from individual to individual, which is exactly why they don't link to our multicultural arguments. This also proves a link to the game theory arguments because it's not debatable to see what the individual inquiry within each
each person and how they experience these things is possible. The debate that abides by the resolution should be different. Their evidence says that the oppressed Asians use the education in the game to use it within the political. That should be sufficient. They should use their privilege to be here to produce better education through harder decisions within these rounds. There is no reason why voting affirmative frees others from being oppressed. There's only a risk of our office. Now, they say that the test K double blind, that was answered on the criticism when I kicked it out. The framework is white supremacy argument. Game theory is key for all people of all education levels to be engaged and develop new skills. Cluffer et al. 9, an educational game should put players in touch with the subject. In order to advance educational games, we should be understanding. Squire in his work with low-income African-American students engaged in playing that participants develop new vocabularies, better understandings of geography and more robust concepts of world history through a recursive process of trial and error. Squire participants were identified by their teachers as underachieving, yet they were able to engage in a game which asked them to account for a host of interacting variables. Engagement in this history-based game simulation motivates them to ask questions. Sorry, I'm continuing to read the underline that's not highlighted because this card's really good. Good luck with it, by the way. Squire's research points to how the very design of attributes of video games support learning. Play of games can work as a pathway toward engaging kids in research. Games can simply introduce players to possible futures of their own academic engagement. Now, the result documents Louisiana House present, or the Erickson evidence present, result is to enact a policy by legislation or law. It also is the single word because of the colon before it, which Christian did a good job, even though he got a 640 on the SAT, which is pretty low. So good job on that. Now, the should arguments, American Heritage Dictionary proves that the should is a will to do something, which is expectation of enacting something. The conscientization argument does not enact something because it is internal, so there is no way to prove whether or not it actually happened because it can be endless questioning of what that action should be. Now, the debate is not policy-making argument. We agree that debate is a game. The resolution sets those boundaries of what the game should be. It's not, even if debate is not policy-making, we should still deliberate about these things, which is still effective because it is able to free those people who are oppressed, like the Asians, which their own evidence concedes. Now, the counter-interpretation argument, their counter-interpretation is topic of conscience. The topic has already been said. You should gauge for that as a topic for what it should become, but not as for what it is now. The invitation specifically said that it should be about this. There's no way that we could predict or formally ground against these types of arguments if we never knew what these things should be. Now, they say that game theory is bad because the game evolves. Yes, we agree, but the process of determining a winner and a loser is a zero-sum nature of the debate that makes it the best form of game theory. That's a Kelly evidence. Also, the process of debate teaches us portable skills that outweigh data, proves that it has the biggest influence over negative reaction. Landon, Merowitz, and I, although research of deliberative theory is the same as informational engine, is the key motivation behind game theory and communication. And the debate is a competitive game because it counts for all of the role of the resolution as a starting point. The debate is the process, and the ballot is the tool for which determines the winner and the loser. That's the Landon and Merowitz evidence. Also, even if the game does evolve, the game will evolve with rules and parameters, and that the resolution sets as boundaries. Yes, their counter-interpretation of the topic of conscience might be a topic later on, which would then be the rules and the boundaries, which means that evolution can still coexist with game theory, which means that this is not offense. Look, there's a huge question that you should set apart from all of their arguments. A lot of their arguments are very generic for framework-based arguments about the skills. This does not apply necessarily to the game theory arguments because we just say that rules are necessary for sites of contestation and for better, fair, and equitable games. Now, the limits bad arguments are all answered by the rules good arguments.
Done?
Yeah.
Alright, let's start with this game theory card. It says that in order to advance the cause of educational game, we should be wary of overarching by claiming the game singly. I don't know.
I read it.
Your Klopper card.
Okay.
By claiming that games single-handedly teach the subject matter. That seems like your framework, that doing a policy single-handedly teaches your dialogue. Why is that not a critique of
You're right, that is our framework.
Yeah,
That's
so
why we solve
it says we should be wary of that.
No, it's that players should be in touch with the subject.
And how is a plan to increase immigration visas in touch with the subjects?
No, not the subjects themselves, but the subject at hand. The resolution is the subject.
Are you kidding me? This says that claiming games single-handedly teaches a subject matter, which is the resolution.
Subject matter, that's
Claiming
like
that
math,
the only
right? Mathematics,
Yeah, so
vocabulary, English, that is a
single-handedly
subject. You are not
teaching
hand-in-hand intact with the philosophers that wrote
Yeah,
the book.
that's fine.
You're still
Later,
learning
it says
the
Squire's
subject matter.
research points to how the very design attributes of video games support learning. How's debate a video
Sorry, I was
game?
catching my breath.
How's debate a video game?
How's debate a video game? No, this evidence is in the context of
the
Okay,
idea
yeah.
of games.
Of a
Yes,
video
it
game.
gives the example of a video game, but
All
then it
right,
goes
that's
on
fine.
to use the
You're
theory
all-
of game theory, which
Yeah,
he
yeah.
studied in
Challenge it.
educational spaces
Hey.
within, sorry.
So the China evidence, topical version of the how do we go through a process of conscientization claiming immigration reform?
Well, our argument is that conscientization argument is not subject to inquiry, right? It's not within the parameters of the resolution. We should debate the resolution.
And why is the affirmative not talk about the resolution? We talk about immigration policies by the United States federal government.
Yes, we agree, and we say that you should use that as a plan to affirm.
So the difference here is a hypothetical enactment and not doing it at all, right?
No.
Then what's the difference?
The difference is that the 1AC plan was to have a sorry, can you say it again?
Conscientization.
That with the history of United States federal government action, it does not do something.
All right,
in the
your
future,
Lee and Hammer
which is
card.
the only thing that is susceptible.
Your Lee and
to
Hammer
those
card
boundaries.
says losing is key. Why shouldn't the negative lose?
The Lee and Hammer evidence is really good as to how if you don't work within the boundaries that have already been set, even if you play the game, if you you have multiple chances to play the game, i.e. 6 rounds here,
Yeah, yeah.
and then if you lose, you can still continue finding ways to win within those parameters, right?
But
It's the
why
act
does
of
that mean
failure
the
that's just like,
affirmation-
well, I keep on losing, but why do I keep losing? So then you fix why you're losing.
Yeah, so
Unless you
why
want to
should the
lose,
negative
which
lose
is
and
like
fix
kinda
why
odd.
you, why should the negative lose and fix why you are losing?
Well, why shouldn't what?
Why shouldn't the negative lose and fix why you two are losing?
Fix why us two are
If
losing.
we prove
I
that
mean,
Frank
yes,
is a bad
like
thing, why shouldn't
Hines
the
has
negative lose?
the ballot and decides who wins or loses.
All right.
And when he says the negative wins,
You said that
X, you
the
will
game-
fix that. Or when he
you
says
say
that
that
the affirmative
debate is a
wins
game,
X, I will.
Hey,
vote
you say that
to
debate is a
fix it.
game.
But-
Why couldn't the game's objective and goal be to reject white supremacy? Why is that a bad goal?
Because that's not the bounds that were set by the top.
Give the-
The resolution is already.
Yeah, I'm taking it back.
I did.
All right.
I used a minute 26, which means we have 7. Yeah, we have 7:52.
7052.
7:52.
752, okay.
I'll just give the order right now. It'll be the conditional ethics stuff, wherever you flow that, the critique, and then case. Like it has a flash. It's right, sorry.
Wait, conditional ethics critique and case.
No,
No,
conditional
the,
ethics.
wherever you made
Yeah,
it.
that's it.
Well, conditional ethics stuff was on the K,
Yeah, go on.
and then the K, so what you said?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Where is that?
Or wherever you flow conditional ethics.
I got it.
Okay.
Do you remember how much?
Yeah, and on the K as well.
Do you remember how much time you have?
We have, oh man, I had like
I remember
7:18 or something.
I remember 6.
6?
I remember
I know it
at
ended in
4:40.
8, so 6:48.
All right.
Yeah.
So is there 4 jump drives for each competitor and 2 pairings for both? Yes.
We love you guys.
Wait, we get 3 flash, right?
Dude, we're short on time. Alright. What is it? Why the speech?
Oh, when you're done with that.
Yeah, I'll take sure.
Thanks.
God.
Legit.
Oh, dang.
these are so nice. Hey. Here.
Oh, how about 2 CPS judges? Or negative Cruciatus with Nelson.
Are we set? Everybody good?
Give me a second. Good. All right.
Okay.
Good.
Conditional ethics is good argumentation that we get 2 non-contradictory conditional hypotheses. This is good because they said the base should be a question of methodology of conscientization. 2 is good because it means that we are able to test them from different areas and not overwhelm them from because the 2AC proves that they were not skewed and inevitable. Different teams also get faster and read different contradictory hypotheses. Also, if we just read it's also key to boxing the affidavit. If we just read RK, they can just go for conscientization turns to how they get spillover fresh reading framework with this is key to boxing them in so they can't go all the way, and one is also key to negative flex, especially when we can't read things like dissents or counterplans get advocacy because they don't defend, say, action and death, and breath out, waste death. It's better to know a lot of things and just go deep in one thing because it means that we're able to get ideological flexibility and able to scratch death, breath over death. Case. It's not a question of whether they are doing things to be different. It's a question of whether conscientization is bad. People will just join and be like, maybe Asian discrimination is a thing, not because they believe in it, but because they don't want to be mainstream. And their movement isn't any different than the hippies movement in the 60s or the goth movement in the 80s. People may join, but it is to prove that they're superior to society because they are conforming. That's Ethan Potter and one creates a race to the bottom. The movement becomes a norm, creating a radical push to be different again. This drive to be different reinforces the system, increasing the culture of competitive consumption, and 2, that turns all of their offense because that means that they actually don't produce any change within the debate space, but reinforce the different stereotypes because people are just doing it to be cool. The radical shift never stops as people adopt it. They're forced to go further. Ethan Potter and 40 quick lists of things that have been considered subversive: smoking, short hair, women hair, heroin, jazz music, punk music, rap music, graffiti, piercing, sneak highs, homosexuality, marijuana, mohawks, afros, postmodernism, army boots. You can find every element typical Britney Spears video counterfactual rebels have become music prophets, forced to push back against shaman, symbol gets co-opted by the system. Rebels are forced to go further and further to set themselves apart from the masses, and you should look at how we recount their severe card. Talks about how they have been recognized right now in Mexico and the United States. That means that their advocacy is necessarily infinitely aggressive, and they are too sucked into overindulgence into themselves, into being looked into why the status quo is sufficient. That is their own evidence, and they don't look at the root cause. They identify themselves as different, and mean the superiors know they were the power ones because they see the people complaining on others, and the absent reconciliation of history is impossible. Their positioning of each historical narrative is immediately separate, gravitating towards the hierarchical structures that presupposes superiority in the dominant ideology. Oliver in 2001, humans must be educated to be actional, not just reactional. Humans must learn not to oppose themselves to the oppressed, must learn to be actional, create their own meaning. Colonization makes the dominant group the creator of values, not recognition per se that is at the stake in overcoming oppression. Rather, it is the power to create meaning for oneself, and our criticism is necessarily a prerequisite because it means that whether we need to determine whether their conscientization is a good thing or a bad thing, not just the effects that it has. And they really didn't answer the politics turn. While it's flagged as a voting issue, which they have conceded the reason to why their method is bad. It trades off with discussions. Of CIR. CIR right now. These statistical people are looking to implement race wars. If CIR is passed, that means it turns the affirmative because we reinforce hierarchies would be created that necessarily put different races at different races at the bottom and. The next turn, Ethan Potter card, not answered. It just says that they shouldn't have to listen to their drive to be different caused them to go extreme further reinforcing competitive consumption rather than breaking it down. That turns it from Ethan Potter and for some people may not have time to share what's less of they can endorse your values by purchasing or guarantee growing your own team makes you seem like a better person. Dropping out of that market creates a market for markets of all natural guarantee for those who do not have time to grow over themselves, exacerbates competitive consumption rather than reduces. It's not that system co-opted their descendants that they were really never descended. Everyday acts involved which are not disrupted the system point at which this building becomes disruptive concept that becomes a nuisance, and their movement fails and is counterproductive. It distracts energy from issues that solve their impacts and encourages contempt of such activities because it works within the system. This was at the bottom that was conceded. We have also indicted their method theory level claims about society. The world is multicultural and people want to make good choices and cooperate. Empirics prove working within social institutions is best. Civil rights movement and feminist movement achieve progress through democratic political action. That's Ethan Potter at best. The act is just a band-aid solution to a disease problem because they never get to the root of the problem because they never engage the institution Constitution itself, and rules are necessary. They sell their poems and they want to see the rules that are non-enforced benefits everyone, not urinating in public or not littering in parks. Living in utopian society is possible and makes individuals take one or two actions. A, reproduce mainstream structures. They impose their own rules based on self-interest. Or B, is the prisoner's dilemma. They want to see a particular outcome but don't have the incentive to do what is necessary. It is a question of who sells out faster. The actualizing viewpoint ignores cultural ability to adapt, discreet, politically disastrous consequences. See them harder and for people's self-interest. Demonstrating willingness to play by the rules. Life without culture would be a state of permanent culture, to count cultural rebels to obfuscation. All social norms are a system of domination. This consequence has been declining stability. Seems to have played in the hands of antisocial attitudes. It's not co-option, it's simple mechanism of adaptation to control antisocial behavior for the sake of transgression politically. This would have can be a disaster. It leads to common cultural activities to reject not just social institutions but already proposed alternative as well.
Rep. 752.
Right, I'm good.
I have 35 seconds to use.
719 left.
Is this class betting on
Football game.
on football games or something?
I think so.
Yeah, this is all their picks.
Wait, take a second.
It's like a mixture of college games and pro games.
Stop. Hey, I need a flash right there. One day I'll learn.
What was the time left after that second time?
7:12.
Well, case, K framework. Here you go.
Case K framework?
Yes.
Give me 1 second.
All right, both of you ready?
I believe so.
Okay.
They dropped internal impacts in the case of myth only modified causes psychological violence against Asians and ecology oppression of other racial minorities because myth is used to justify the meritocracy thesis and to less white supremacy content. Is this question of white supremacy is total impact in case size impact terms framework and the KR scale? No, go to KR right now. We don't need to annually political action because we are the internal process. We are the internal process that's not like a hippie movement. And people copying us is not something that does on the brand because everyone has a different process constellation. But also impact constellation. Also he says that we lead to no changes. If that leads to no changes, not often. So there's no total impact. What new movement is better or what institution is better for solving that impact? They don't have the reason why they can solve the internal impact state. Read that. So that the civilian arguments you have dropped a role in the Yancey evidence. The civilian arguments is wrong because even in Korean cellular culture, that's a way to oppress. That's a form of constellation, a form of oppression, the form of trying to resist the oppression that they have suffered in the past. That does not mean that they like this status quo. They're just trying to have a happy and optimistic life outlook in life, which is constant with constellation. Not the role of the Yancey. This will job mean that their view from nowhere should be protected because the Yancey evidence is that when you carve to your authors don't have to live experience. And also the role of evidence is that philosophical criticism or just gaining counting whiteness. I mean, say you fundamentally you know race was what the criticism trying to say. Don't discuss race because your movement is going to equality. That's exactly the logical things arguments. Mean that racism is going to impact this. The reason why the CIR turns right now. CIR turns not office either because the hierarchy exists right now. The racial is not going to change anything if we don't go through a process conversation. Our counterfactual framework discussing immigration policy should be able to solve this argument because we don't need a policy in order to discuss CIR. There's no link to the last article of the arguments, guys, because we are not a new movement. We are internal movement. And also, what is this new movement that's going to solve our case. They don't have a reason for this. Don't let it do the analysis in the twin R. We do questions instituted within society through Conscientization. Now the K argument. So major mistake on here was this countercondition of two non-contradictory options. You see the problem here, whether answering contradictions are, and they have to maintain that the framework arguments and the K arguments were a contradiction in the first place because they say textualism is bad. Also, the K argument says that movements are bad when the K arguments criticized too, which means that they have conceded linked contradiction. Besides the independent voting issue to vote affirmative because contradiction is sustained white supremacy. Mishandled impact here. The non-counting critical evidence says that contradictions let sustain white supremacy because white supremacy uses these to justify movements, justify and put down movements against racism by using different standards, which is what the framework arguments are doing. Also, the 260 arguments and the Watson and F arguments are not responsible because your form of decision making is white supremacy. When you learn how to be that, that's how you become confident learners who do it. Or I said, also the breath outweighs steps arguments. I'm going to make here. Learning about these topics is better. We can partially concede that argument too because that proves why learning about more things on framework is valid. Go to framework over your idea. A framing issue for framework is that they don't have a terminal impact of what this game is. Why is fairness good and fairness for who are the questions usually asking out of the game? We say our risk of education should be able to outweigh. Our role of the ballot is to who best deliberates first. That solves better because we method for that is Conscientization. We perform these solving because we break down the myth of the mind debate. The top of the first round does not do anything because there are no Asians in Latin America right now. We're just a historical example. Visa policy does not solve Conscientization with myth of mind. No explanation for that in this way either. They say that we should lose. You should lose to rethink your exclusionary model of name, which we will prove a link to later. Also, that this argument goes from there. They also consider this is just an excuse for trying to get an after debate, which shouldn't be a valid discussion. If we let that absence of valid discussion, that means that we don't see the political because the type of research that you lead to is bad regardless. With Conscientization should be able to solve this argument because they have talked about the argument that the reason why Asians are not quick with this actually because they have not gone through a process of Conscientization, knowing how you exist in the world, and of the system of white supremacy is critical to doing this. The decision-making arguments have no impact, and you don't have internally to decision-making either because we don't need a plan to learn how to bypass decision-making skills or inevitable with any type of debate with any type of way. They say that we can do our project outside. The only way to make people listen is to make them lose, which is your own argument. Meaning that the framework of my problem debate, CSL, and my mind, frameworks of my mind, they are saying that we should hold a racist form of debate, not just being context, which is the reason why the rule side determinant argument is dumb regardless because we say that they misunderstood it from the point you see going that debate is just more than the game. It's a question. Other ones more like the opposing card extended right here. The opposing card says that we solve polluting engagement. Our education solves the decision-making impact of the card because the opposing card cites thousands of debaters who want to make leaders of a legal structure. The reason why performance making create real change. Also, the debate is not a game, but it's a challenge of white supremacy. You can see this from the crash items because the game audience, the resolution is grounded with the white supremacy, which means that we need multicultural and different ways of debate. Looking at this, not a counterfactual. You did not read Erickson Carter's white which means that they don't have a definition of what this debate should game though. Once the definition that they read is not true because it says that results can only work for the discussed ledger form if it's used as an independent clause. One word is not an independent clause. Means that you should prefer our counterfactual results saying that results to reduce mental analysis. Finally, I'll also extend counterfactual, discuss the topic itself because we're not the death of the rest of the debate. We still lead to the political impacts of the political interest you lead to, but we introduce more perspective. The perspective are good because it causes multiculturalism. You have talking about Valdivia, Southern Amazon, comments, saying that if debates multiculturalism, that would only defend the context. That means that the game is going to die. It means that we have eternal empathy. So I'm going to finish with Valdivia, Southern card right here. And the ability to the honest stations for climate standing human development within forms and culture, curriculum, combined must continue to adapt, evolving interaction with ever-changing environmental extension. We must recognize the potential education game. We must expose ourselves to extension. This can be common and expose the seeds to create one form. Finally, extend the rhetorical imperialism argument because I will only do in the text and only find the rules of the game right now. At least imperialism because it decides because white supremacists decide who makes the game. Thus means the child and this means that the informed game is racist.
6 for the game. For the Valdivia Southern card in the 1A art, I don't think I actually read 2 of the words in the very last sentence, which is geared to inform about other cultures. I think I skipped other and 2 by accident.
Okay.
6, 4, I don't want to be calling for clipping. All right.
It'll be framework, case, critique.
I'm not ready now. Not going for concede that there's no impact, but we will concede that there is no Asians in Latin America proves that they do not solve anything on the planet. Their advocacy statement says that to conscientize the history of the United States federal government in economic engagement towards Mexico. There are no Asians in Latin America that they cannot free the oppressed Asians. The internal struggle that they advocate proves that it links to all of our turns on case, and it's the reason why they advocate for multicultural arguments, which I will explain on the case why those are bad. If they are not able to solve for the case, it means that you can vote negative on presumption because they cannot necessarily change the oppression that occurs in the system. So, and is a reason why the system would be sufficient to solve, which I will explain on the case as well. Let's go there now. Their vision of challenging white supremacy will get more radical as people adopt it. There are two turns that they have functionally dropped. Their movement isn't any different than the hippies movement in the 60s or the goth movement in the 80s. The people may join, but it is to prove that they are superior to society because they are not conforming to the societal norms. That's the heathen part of it. This re-entrenches the idea of the model minority, which turns the advocacy the Asians that try to separate themselves will think that they are superior because they are not abiding by the social norms. There are three implications. One is this creates a race to the bottom because their movement becomes a norm, creating the radical push to be different again. This drive to be different reinforces the system, increasing the culture of the competitive consumption. This means that the oppression becomes worse because the system would reject their form of they would be able to decide who is included in that and who is not, i.e. their advocacy statement just says that it should be in the context of in Mexico, but there are no Asians in Mexico, so who can take part of that and who can be free from that oppression? Yes, keep on raising your hands because you don't solve your affirmative. Second is this radical push to counter the white supremacy never stops. Our movement becomes subversive when society begins to accept it, or what they called quote-unquote co-option in the 1AR, which was a new extrapolation. That is just a link argument to prove why they will continue going further left to be different and to be superior. The third is this link turns the entirety of the gap. Their idea of being separate from the market actually re-entrenches those market values and the values that they try to separate because they are trying to still be part of the society, just be set apart and be different. They are still trying to be part of the debate norms, but be something that is recognized as something different and something special. The symbolic resistance is not disrupt the system, but when rebellions do disrupt the movements, it's just seen as a nuisance, which means that they do not solve. Now, the trade-off they said was definitely dropped, which was at the bottom of the 1AR, which I thought Christian did a pretty good job of extending. Their movement fails and is counterproductive. It detracts energy from initiatives that solves their impacts and encourages the contempt of such activities. Because it works within the system, we also have indicted their meta-theory level claims about society. The world is multicultural and people want to make good choices and cooperate. Empirics prove that working within these social institutions is best. The civil rights movements, the feminist movements, and the nuclear movements achieve progress through democratic political action. That's a heathen part of it. It's individual consciousness does not change the previous oppression, which is all that their advocacy statement says to do, which is just the history, which means that they don't solve future oppression because their own 1AC evidence, which Christian reread in the 1AC did a fantastic job recutting, says that the people in Mexico made a monument to the Koreans that were oppressed in Mexico. That should be sufficient to solve that argument. Now, also the politics they said was framed as a voting issue in the 1NC, which they didn't answer. If the act is able to solve, then vote negative on, if it doesn't solve, then you should vote negative on presumption. Argument is that CIR is a critical discussion that's happening in Congress now, but that that scapegoating these havoc in the resolution means that we cannot talk about the intersubjective things that occur as a result of a plan, which means that it would cause a race war because we don't know whether or not the plan would cause CIR to pass or not. I shouldn't have to do much extension because there was no impact events, conceded impact. Now the critique. Gabe cannot go for this argument when Michael does not extend an interpretation, even if ours is not the best. You should still defend negative because we have a clear interpretation and they do not. The only reason they said our ethics are bad is because in the 1AR Christian apparently said two non-contradictory advocacies, but he went on to say that even if they are contradictory, that is good because it means that we are able to box in the affirmative, so they can't go all leaning in one way towards leaning towards a critique. The framework arguments box them, and so they. Sorry, water makes you burn. Framework arguments box them in, so they have to defend a specific method. They also conceded the methodology testing arguments. Michael said in the one you see, the debate should come down to a question of whether conscientization, or however you say it, sorry, I'm really bad at that word, is good or bad. And also that necessitates multiple areas of testing the act, or it becomes an advocacy. And the advocacy debate which kills negative ground because it formulates the grounds of which the debate should begin with. In reality, is they don't have an answer to skew inevitable or negative flex arguments. They can just call it a form of white supremacy. That is not good because the skew is not inevitable.
We have 712. If you get this. We have plenty of time. You still can see good. You still can see a roll up. You still can see all the cards are free, but we're still.
your ballot act because a process of conscientization is still good. Notice how none of the cards that two and are isolated has any mention of a critical conscience or us learning who we are in relation to rule and growing epistemology through this debate round. They have no cards on it saying us and me and Michael go through a process of conscientization and growing epistemology. At first, it results of daily psychological violence that Asians face. We are always swept under the rug. Silence. Conscientization gives us a voice to these people, gives us a voice to us to speak out against the oppression of Asian language, which is invalidated by the black homologous culture of poverty and always swept under the rug. The second impact is the model minority myth. Allows the oppression of other minorities because the blacks are told why can't you be as hardworking as the Asians and the blame is put on them. This is how conservatives justify oppression in the status quo of other minorities. The myth of rise because Asians believe in it. So the conscientization is necessary so that Asians do not buy into the myth, break down the myth itself. Now, I think the negative has a misclarification. This is why I said we do not have a plan in the cross-sex. You want to see, we do not, we say we should go through a process of conscientization to break down the myth of the model minority. We do this specifically in an instance in the resolution by interrogating the myth of the model minority that was present in Mexico. However, that does not dispute this thesis of the affirmative why conscientization is good. This historical analysis is an irrelevant part to a process of conscientization and why that is still good to resolve the psychological violence of Asians and resolve the oppression of other minorities. They have no impact even to the affirmative why a process of conscientization is good in that abstract manner, which means that you automatically vote affirmative line by line. First is that there is no alternative. The role of the ballot was conceded again into it. You must have a competing methodology to bring a process through. However, there is now either our movement can happen and it might get co-opted or something, or we cannot not go through a process of conscientization and nothing happens. There's only a risk that our office itself and they have conceded from the framework debate that right now debate is a white supremacist state and controlled by white supremacists, which means that if you do not do anything, if you do not go through a process of conscientization, and there is no alternative, you reintegrate a white supremacist form of debate, which is a bad thing impacted by the framework debate. First is this hippies argument. It's not the hippies movement because it's a different for every person. No, but the one you isolates that your experience, your epistemic growth is different from mine, and what me and Michael go through. This means that it's not that everyone's going to conform to our group because they can't conform. You cannot conform to an internal process because your internal process is a difference. That means you cannot have a race to the bottom because everyone is already culturally different. Now, even if it's a race to the bottom, that does not mean the culture is reinforced. Conscientization allows Asians to go against the grain and is able to resolve for that. That's the Osajima card. They have conceded again. Now, they say their second impact is that the push will never happen. However, the push is happening in our minds in this round. The role of card impact is because saying that the push will never happen is just a colorblind mentality saying that, oh yes, white supremacy is too large, let's not talk about it at all. And it tries to sweep under the rug. That allows the white supremacy to continue in this philosophical criticism does nothing. Their link turn argument do not make sense. He had to and did not explain what the market is and what separating from the market means. We say that process of conscientization is probably a prerequisite to any of those arguments, which means that we solve now their trade-off deficit. What is the movement? That is the question of the 1AR answer. We are a prerequisite to that movement because Asians are apolitical, do not engage in institution because of the they have not gone through a process of conscientization. The Polson card from the framework directly turns its leader of the beautiful struggle proof that even if we debate performance out of the institution, we are still able to act within institutions that create real trade. I do not need to buy a house to know how finances work now. Those institutions mean that white supremacy and contribute and the problem is because there's no alternative to talk about an institution. They never just say that we should work in an institution and there's no unique performance. It's that politics, it's that character interpretation solves the framework debate that we do not have to talk about. Also the impact, there is absolutely no link just because we do not talk about policy doesn't mean the Polson card can solve. Go into the framework. The presumption arguments do not make any sense. This was an interrogation history card I talked about. We talk about Mexico history, but that is irrelevant the fact that a process of conscientization, this presumption argument makes so little sense when they can see that debate is a white supremacist system right now, and the Valdivia Southern evidence is unstructured. That means this is a new advantage. The framework is a new advantage for the affirmative because debate is white supremacist right now, and that our process of conscientization is able to change and to make it because the Valdivia Southern provides the impact that debate will go extinct if we do not recognize these other types of forms of debate, which means that their critique causes literally the destruction of debate.
Back on the CIR Turn, Conscientization was discussing immigration policy. We saw.
Yeah, counter-interpretation was discussing immigration policy as economic event. That should be able to solve CIR. There's no impact. Now the critique. Our argument was that contradictions were bad because they are white supremacists and perceived the link that duality was contradictory because of the first, their critique is saying that we should work within the institution and that textualism and just speaking out is bad. However, that's contradictory with the framework was that we must have a plan. Also, it's a contradictory with the case argument. Now, the impact of the continuation is white supremacy justify a model of debate where the net can internally contradict less to white supremacy function because of white supremacy maneuvers through and around challenging against the power to be many things at once through contradictions. This is the not create a card. They do a framing shift. This was not a theory argument, so impacts like net ground and flex mean nothing, just like framework. They do not have a terminal impact. What does the net ground lead to? There was a question unanswered by the 2 and R.